On our next excursion with Painting and Travel, Roger and Sarah take us to Montana and the National Bison Refuge. We'll take a tour of the park to see its abundant wildlife. While back in the studio, Roger uses acrylics to paint one of the magnificent buffalo.
Look at this magnificent landscape. You can see mountain ranges in every direction, plus steep as well as gentle hillsides with tall grasses perfect for grazing and for roaming. This is the National Bison Refuge in Moise, Montana. Along the well-maintained gravel road, you can drive a 19-mile loop through the refuge in less than an hour and experience a protected wildlife area, home to white-tailed deer, elk, pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, mule deer, black bear, golden eagles, magpies, and 350 to 400 bison, also known as buffalo. Driving through an unspoiled area like this consumes your senses. You've entered a world of fast-changing beauty. We stopped numerous times to take pictures and watch the clouds build, the sky color change from blue to stormy dark gray, and see the light patterns dance across the hills and valleys. Driving through slowly and respectfully doesn't seem to bother the buffalo or egg them on. They seem peaceful and placid. However, I did notice that the mothers with calves were keeping an eye on us. Buffalo are unpredictable and can run fast as horses. The bulls weigh 2,000 pounds and the cows weigh half that, so you certainly don't want to forget who's in charge. It's important to stay in your vehicle and remember your place, as this is their protected home and extremely important for their survival. We found the buffalo's appearance fascinating. We loved watching them. And at the end of the day, we realized we'd spent 6 hours on the 19-mile loop and enjoyed every minute of it.
We were lucky enough to see quite a few of these buffalo at the park, and with my video camera, I took quite a bit of footage. Then I just freeze framed the video to get the exact position here that I'm going to paint. I'm going to use acrylics today, and I'm basically using just 3 or 4 brushes, a few flats, and 1 small pointed brush for details, but that won't be for later on. I've already sketched the buffalo out here in pencil, and this is a piece of masonite primed with gesso. And after I sketched this, I sprayed this with fixative, so when I put my paint on, it won't smear the pencil lines. I'm going to be using acrylics today, and on my palette I have titanium white, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, Indian yellow, alizarin crimson, and I have 3 earth colors, which are burnt sienna, burnt umber, and yellow ochre. The other thing that's very important when I paint with acrylics is a spray bottle. Not only helps to keep my paint wet on my palette, but I keep my board wet occasionally when I'm painting. It helps my paints slide over the board a little bit easier. Now when I look at the buffalo here, I'm seeing a lot of cool colors down in the bottom part of the buffalo, and I'm seeing a lot of warm colors up here. So I'll probably be using my cerulean blues and ultramarine blues down here, my burnt siennas and yellow ochres up in this area. Now, I've already sprayed my board here, so it's slightly wet, And you see how this paint just flows on there quite easily. This is not a new brush, this is rather an old brush, but for things like fur on an animal, an older brush sometimes works even better than a new brush. I'm applying this rather thin, so I can still see my pencil lines through all this here. Right here we have his leg, and it's a bit darker behind his leg. I'm holding my brush rather loose here, just to give myself a kind of a loose feeling as to where this fur is. I don't want to just go with little strokes here. Now I may do that later on, but at the first part of this painting, I just want to get this covered and leave myself enough nice texture in the background here that I can build on. Down here are some cooler colors. Now I'm going to put these warmer colors up here. So I'll pick up my yellow ochre, some Indian yellow there, and burnt sienna. I'll just apply these kind of in the same manner as I did down here, with just sort of a loose feel to it. Here I'll pick up a touch of red. This is a very powerful image, I think. When we were in the park, I tried to stay quite a ways away from these animals and very close to our RV, but I did see a few people there that did seem to get closer than I was certainly willing to do. But with a camera and a long lens, I was able to get these pictures that I needed. I'm varying my colors here quite a bit, even though I'm not using much palette space down here. In other words, I'm not blending a lot of these together at this point, because I want a lot of variation in the colors in this fur. It's basically one big broad shape, this buffalo, and without having a lot of variation within this, it's just going to look more or less like a silhouette. I'm going to leave this eye right here untouched for right now, because I don't want to lose my drawing there, because that's really one of the most important parts of the painting, right here where this eye is. Put a wash over this now, but I can still see my pencil lines. With some cerulean blue, I'll just put a wash right in here on his horn there. Now, a lot of this brush work, see, it can just work to my advantage. I really didn't fuss with it or mess with it very much. I just used the brush to create the fur here, and I let the brush do all the work. But what I'm really trying to do is get away from this notion that I have to paint every little piece of fur in there, every hair. If I can do this with a broad brush and create the same effect, I think it will be a more effective painting. So I'm almost finished laying in the colors and the values here on the buffalo. Technically these are bison and not buffalo, but you know, we all call them buffalo. Now I've lost my pencil drawing in some of these areas, but that's all right. There's really not that much detail going on down in these areas. We've only been here just a minute or two, but this is dry enough. Now, paint dries quite fast, especially on a masonite board with gesso. It really sinks in, and even if I rub hard on that, it's dry. So the nice thing about these acrylics is now I can go over this with a second layer and start to refine it. But before I do that, I'm going to wash my brush out, and I'm going to mix a color that I think might be appropriate for the background, maybe with some cerulean blue and yellow ochre. I'm going to put in a very light color here, and I may vary this and mix it on my board. I don't have to mix it always on my palette here. I can just pick up some of these colors really without mixing it very much. I can mix those right up here, right on my board without mixing it on the palette. I want this background to be quite flat. There's so much texture in this area of the buffalo. I don't need much texture back here to compete with that. If I spray my board, just give it a little mist, then this paint will slide over this masonite even better, even quicker. And I'll stay with this larger brush and just blend this out here Once again, I don't want to use a lot of small strokes when I do a background. I don't want to just spend a lot of time just dabbing the brush and trying to get that background in and spending lots of time doing that. It's pretty much a solid background, so I just load up my brush and just put it on there. I'm using the edge of my brush here, and I'm pulling it in over this fur to leave a nice soft edge right here, a nice furry looking edge. And in a while I'll do the opposite. I'll take the colors here and I'll pull them out into this painting once this dries. Some more of my background color. And I'll finish this off right down here under his neck. You can see here I'm just flipping this brush up into his fur. Just makes it look like that fur is coming down into the background. I'm blending out the background some before this dries, and I'm putting enough paint on this background so it covers quite well. In other words, I'm loading my brush up with paint because I don't want any of this to show through. I want the background to be quite solid, and I don't want any of that white masonite board to show through, at least not on this area of the background here. Well, I think that might be all I need with this larger brush. I'm going to move down to my smaller brushes now. These two other brights right here, they're about the same size. One's a little bit larger. With burnt umber and ultramarine blue, I'll start putting in some of these spaces between his fur. This fur is so thick. I believe I'll spray this first with my sprayer. And the reason I spray this so often is for a couple reasons. One, it makes my paint flow over the dry paint much easier. And if I want a soft edge, by spraying this, when I apply this paint is sort of going to seep out into that spray and give me a soft edge. All this fur sort of layers together. Painting this with a very light touch. I'm almost balancing my brush here. And I'm just kind of letting the brush follow its own path, just slightly guiding it. I'll spray this again. I'll just keep that wet. I'm using the edge of my brush too. This is a fairly good brush. And it's got a chisel edge on it. So I'm using the edge of the brush. Instead of a pointed brush, I could use a pointed brush for this too, but a brush like this holds a lot of paint, so that makes it convenient. I don't have to load the brush up every time I put down a stroke, not quite as often anyway. This is a very dark part of his nose, right there. Also right under here it gets quite dark, right before his beard. Got a dark part right under his eye. Now I am going to do the eye here with a smaller brush. Side of the brush there, just scumble that on. I'll wash my brush out and I'll work on this horn by taking my white and cerulean blue. I can put some highlights right on the edge of the horn. And then down in this area right here, I'm going to make that warmer. It seems to be catching the sunlight. So I'll mix my titanium white and yellow ochre. This is one of the brightest parts of the painting right there. In any part of the painting that's getting a lot of sunlight hitting it, I try and apply more paint to it. Paint will be a little thicker there. And around back, it's catching some reflected light. With the cerulean blue, I'll pick up a touch of the burnt umber there. I got some fur in there over his horn. I want to get rid of that, so I'll just, with the opaque colors, we'll fill this horn in again. Well, it seems like I do need one more brush. I'm picking up another flat. This is a rather small flat, and I'm going to cut in around this horn. Since this is such an important part of the painting, I want there to be a lot of contrast in these areas, because what will bring attention to any part of any painting is the difference between the light and the dark. If there's a lot of contrast between two objects, your eye will tend to go there. So I want the eye to go up in this area. I think it normally would anyway, but I'm making this darker around here just to be sure the attention stays focused in here. Cerulean blue and brown, that will give me a gray color, and some white. And the nose right here, that will become lighter. This nose tends to be kind of wet, very wet actually. So I'll put a highlight on there in just a moment. Wash the brush out, and with some light color, put that highlight right in his nose where that tends to be very moist. Well, I'm going to jump up to his eye now with some warm colors. I'm going to put in the bottom part of his eye here. These dark colors will go around it. This I really have to keep referencing my photograph here to be sure I'm on target with this. He's got sort of an eyelid or something. I'm not sure what it's called, but right up here there tends to be a lighter spot where the fur is quite a bit shorter. Okay, here's that eyebrow, as I called it, right in there. And more dark areas right up in his eye. Okay, I'll let the paint around the eye dry for a few moments, and we'll go back to working on some more of the wrinkles in the fur in here. So I'll spray this again. I can go back to my slightly larger brush. We'll go back to using some of this dark color, the ultramarine blue and burnt umber. I'll be sure that's wet enough. I can't get it too wet though, or the paint is just going to really run. Kind of get used to how it feels and how much spray needs to be put on there. Now, with just a very loose touch, the wrinkles over on this side tend to just sort of blend into each other. So I'm not going to use a hard edge to paint those. I'm just going to use the edge of my brush and let it drift over this board to create some of that texture I see in my reference photograph. I'm not loading my brush up very much to do this. There's not too much paint on the brush. Drag some of these areas out with it using the side of the brush. Same goes up here. Right up here on his shoulder, it's catching some nice sunlight. So with my titanium white, Indian yellow, and alizarin crimson, I'm going to make a warm, sunny color. And I'll apply that right up here on his shoulder. I'll spray that again because that light color just drifts down slightly this way, and then it kind of fades out. So between these dark areas here, where these folds are in the fur, I'll apply some of this sunlight, this highlight color. And I'll touch some of that over in this area. Just touching my brush to the board here, right in this area. I don't see those creases, I just see small little almost round patches of sunlight or fur that shows up. Now the darkest part of this animal runs right through here. It's between the part that gets all the sunlight and the part that's getting some reflection from the ground. That's the darkest part. So under here I'm seeing those cool colors. And by picking up cerulean blue, and this is dry already, I'm going to use this cerulean blue rather thin, and I'm going to put a wash of cerulean blue right under here. Now I have to be sure that this is totally dry before I do that, because if I put a wash on there and this acrylic is not dry, I'll pick up those dark colors and I'll cause myself some problems and some issues. But this is dry, most of it. I'm just putting this on with a light touch. I guess this whole painting is really being done with a kind of a light touch, isn't it? With this cerulean blue color, I'll drag that up into the lower part of his head. So what I'm trying to do here is get some nice variations in tones of color. With some cerulean blue and burnt umber, I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to spray the painting one more time here, and I'm going to flip this brush right up this way. Now that will make that look like there's fur coming off the animal's head right in that area. I don't want to flip that out too far, but that really does give it that look of fur coming out. And the nice thing about this is I don't have to go in there with a small brush and paint every single little piece of fur that's coming out. I'm just letting the brush do all this work for me. Sometimes people look at a painting like this and they'll think there's a lot more detail in the painting than there actually is, just because it's suggested in such a way with the brush. And I'll do the same thing down here by his beard. I'm just sort of keeping this brush at right angles to the painting and just flipping it down. And then just pulling my brush away on that down part of the stroke. Once again, with a small flat and some white and yellow ochre, I'm going to make a few more highlights up here by the shoulder. But this time I'm going to pick up some more red, some more alizarin crimson, and some yellow. What I'm going to do now is just put more color in this painting than I actually see in the photograph, to try and make it come alive a bit more than what the photograph shows me. It's a pretty bright pink, actually. I'm using this thin, so it's actually a bit of a transparent color as I apply this over it, so it's not quite as pink as you see here on the palette once it gets on the canvas here. I'm letting the brush do as much work as it can, just sort of letting it dance across the board. I am looking at my reference photo, but I'm just sort of letting this go naturally. I'm not trying to figure out, where's the next little indication of light here. This is just sort of intuition by putting these things on here, by placing them in. Okay, now that I have some of these brighter colors here, I'm going to mix the cerulean blue and white. Do the same thing down here. I think I'll spray this one more time. So what I did here is basically I added these dark stripes where the shadows of the fur went. Now I'm putting in some of the light areas between where some of those shadows are. Well, to finish this painting, I need to put in the eye. It's one of the most important parts of the painting. The upper part of his eye here is catching some reflected light from the sky. So I'm making this with some cerulean blue and white. The bottom part of the eye is reflecting light from the ground, and that's why I made this burnt sienna color to begin with. I want to get some very dark colors here now. With ultramarine blue, touch of alizarin crimson, and burnt umber, I'm going to make a very dark color, and I'll define his eye right here. Now, one way to make an animal more endearing, not that I want to make this buffalo too endearing, but if the eye is made slightly larger, or if it's a child or anything like that, it'll make it look much more endearing. I've done a lot of horse drawings, and I've always made the eyes slightly larger than they are. Makes the animal look a little more friendly. Okay, right on the top part of his eye, that's going to be dark. Got a crease right under here. I'll wash this brush out, and with some white, I'll make the highlight on his eye. And I'll pull that back just a little bit. A few more highlights. I think I'll warm this one up with some yellow ochre. And he has an eyelid right above his eye. And I can't really see a pupil in his eye, but I'm going to add one right there. but I'm going to keep that soft. A lot of the other parts of this painting can be quite arbitrary, but right here, this is what has to have some care taken with it, get it as right as I can. If that eye is not drawn properly, the whole painting won't look too good. Now with this very small brush, I can stay with this and add a few little individual hairs up by this eye. It really wasn't necessary to do that in these other areas. I let the brush do the work for me. So a few small strokes showing individual hairs here is okay. It's probably a good thing. I don't want to overdo that, but a few strokes here and there I think might just add the finishing touch. Pure cerulean blue here, right there in the eye. And then pure yellow ochre right under the eye, right there. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this. It really wasn't a very difficult painting to do because we had such a strong, powerful subject and shape to begin with. The important thing was to keep the shapes simple and not get hung up in a lot of small details. Well, a frame always adds the finishing touch to a painting, so I'll put a frame on it now and we'll take one last look.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.